Shalom, Israel. My lesson study was on when does a biblical day begin. Before I endeavor to present what I have been led to see, I just want to make a point of saying, yes, we know that we are Israelites. And yes, we understand that we would have been enslaved. But we have to recognize that this is all a part of what had to happen. Some of the punishments would have been more severe, as the nations would have went beyond what Yah wanted. Nevertheless, we have to bear in mind that we have to go back to the Most High with all of our hearts, all of our might, and all of our strength. And we have to go to Him, not in flesh, but in spirit and in truth. That said, many prophecies still have to be fulfilled pertaining to Israel, Abraham's seed, the bloodline. And in order for we as Israel to be ready and prepared fully, we have to recognize what the Most High requires of us. Remember, He did say that we are His servant. We are a peculiar people. So now, what I'm sharing is my study on what constitutes a day based upon Scripture, so that we can at least analyze what is being said and then apply it to our lives to make the necessary corrections. This study may very well lead into when is the new moon, or what is the new moon, and when is the new moon day within the context of Scripture. Genesis chapter 1 verse 16. In this verse, we need to notice that the Most High, He would not start the day with the lesser light. Think about it. Why would the Most High start the day with the lesser light? Genesis 1 verse 18. We need to notice the order. It says day, night, light, darkness. Now to go into the study in a little more in depth, let's go to Genesis chapter 19 verses 33 to 34. Here we can notice that the next day followed the night. Exodus chapter 10 verses 13. We also notice here that that day belongs to that night. Then the morning came. Let's read Exodus chapter 16 verses 22 to verses 27. Here we notice that Yah said that tomorrow was Sabbath. Then the morning comes, and Moses said, eat it today, for today is a Sabbath. Do you see that? Do you understand it? Get your concordance, get your dictionary, and go through every verse, every word in every verse, and see what it's actually saying. But for me, this is one of the clearest texts in Scripture that clearly shows the seventh day Sabbath starts in the morning. Let's read Exodus chapter 18 verse 13. Notice that the next day starts in the morning. Let's go to Exodus chapter 32, verses 5 to verse 6. Notice here also that Aaron said, tomorrow is a festival to Yah. And the next day they rose early. Leviticus chapter 6 verse 20. Notice that the offering was to be brought to Yah in the morning, the beginning of the day. Leviticus chapter 7 verse 15. Here's my question. How can you eat your peace offering the same day and not leave any of it until the morning if your day starts at night? Understand the question, understand the reasoning of the question. Leviticus chapter 7 verse 15. We really need to look into these scriptures. Bear in mind also, brethren, that I am in the Torah. I have not left the Torah to go into the new covenant or even to the prophets as yet. Numbers chapter 11 verse 32. Notice again that that day belongs to that night. Then the morning comes. Now we go into the book of Joshua chapter 7 verses 6 to 13. Notice that it was already evening when Yah told Joshua, sanctify themselves for tomorrow. So the day cannot begin in the evening. Judges 19 verse 9. Notice that rising early tomorrow implies that the start of the day begins in the morning. 1 Samuel chapter 9 verse 19 to 26. Notice that the rising early equals the day starting in the morning. Also notice in 1 Samuel chapter 19 verse 10. In 1 Samuel chapter 19 verses 10 to 11, we also have to notice that it was already night when Michael told David to flee in the morning, for tomorrow he was to be killed. So a day cannot begin at evening. Let us continue. 1 Samuel chapter 28 verses 8 to 19. Notice that if Saul came at night and they were to fight the Philistines tomorrow, how could the day begin at night? 1 Samuel chapter 30 verse 17. Notice that if a day was from evening to evening, the scriptures would not have to read the next day. 2 Samuel chapter 24 verse 13 to 15. Notice that the 3-day plague started in the morning and not at night. Lamentations chapter 3 verse 22. Notice that they are new every morning, because morning is a new day. Jonah chapter 4 verses 6 to verse 7. Notice that a morning starts the next day. Zechariah chapter 14 verse 7. Notice a 24-hour day is mentioned here, with the day preceding the night. Okay, let's go to the New Testament. Matthew chapter 28 verse 1. Luke chapter 24 verse 1. Mark chapter 16 verse 2. John chapter 6 verse 16 verses 22. Notice that in all these scriptures the Sabbath ended at dawn. Again, notice in all of these scriptures, the Sabbath ended at dawn. Dawn is the beginning of a day. Notice that it was already dark at night when these things took place. Then the next day occurs. We can read Acts chapter 4 verse 3. Notice again, it was dark then the next day. Acts chapter 16 verses 9 to 11. Notice that the next day follows the night. Acts chapter 23 verses 31 to 32. Notice that the next day follows the night. So now, brothers and sisters, after all these, having the night as the first part of the day seemed to be a reversal of Yahushua's parables, which he describes himself as the light of the world. We can read these things in the New Covenant. John chapter 8 verse 12. John chapter 9 verse 5. John chapter 11 verse 10. John chapter 11 verse 9 to verse 10. John chapter 12 verses 35. John chapter 12 verse 46. How about 1 Thessalonians 5 and 5? How about Romans 13, 12 to 13? How about Ephesians chapter 5 and 8? I am not saying that there aren't any scriptures that may seem as though from evening to evening is a day. One scripture that pops up in my mind is Leviticus chapter 23 verses 26 to 32. The Sabbath for the Day of Atonement. Okay, brothers and sisters, the Sabbath for the Day of Atonement differs from the other Sabbaths simply because in that Sabbath, Yah specifies that this particular Sabbath to be kept like this. He gave you the law, the statute. He gave you the law and the statute that governs how this particular Sabbath to be kept. We can read in Exodus 23 and 13. Furthermore, my comment on this is that if this scripture is not taken into context, when it is taken out of context, it may cause misunderstanding. Why would Yah command us to start the fast on the 9th at evening if the 10th day starts at evening anyhow? Think about it, brothers and sisters. There are some scriptures that I know brothers and sisters may think that because you have to come into camp clean and hence you're told, get yourself clean for the evening. They use those scriptures to say, well, this is proof that a day begins from evening to evening. But no. Remember, there are statutes that govern the laws, how we keep the laws. Statutes show us what is going on with regards to keeping the law, how to keep the law, how the law is applied. Once we apply those statutes to that law, then we have a clear understanding of what the Most High requires of us. So brothers and sisters, let's get it right. We need to understand when a day begins, and we also need to understand when Yah months begin. It does not begin in the month, the dead of winter, like this world has taught us. Yah's month begin Abib. In Abib, then you start to count his months. From then, scripture in Psalm says, teach us to number our days, not to name. Teach us to number our days, and my heart shall apply unto wisdom. With that, brothers and sisters, corrections, please send